In the farthest corner of the galaxy, there was a quiet hum, a sound that was barely noticeable at first. A ship, small and unassuming compared to the mighty fleets of the galaxy, drifted through space. It wasn't the first of its kind, nor would it be the last, but there was something different about this particular vessel. It was a ship that no one had expected, yet its arrival would change everything. The galaxy, vast and ancient, had seen countless wars, alliances, and civilizations rise and fall. For centuries, the great powers of the galaxy ruled with unchallenged might. Massive fleets commanded by powerful alien species patrolled the stars, ensuring that no one dared to cross them. They had seen ships of all sizes, from the tiniest scout vessels to the mightiest dreadnoughts, each one carrying its own purpose, but no one had ever seen a ship quite like this one. Humanity, a relatively young species compared to the ancient empires of the galaxy, had only recently begun to stretch its fingers out into the cosmos. Their presence was barely noticed, and their ships, primitive in design, were considered a joke by the established powers. Yet, this new ship that entered the galaxy was different. It was not like the others. As the small ship cruised through the silent void, its engines glowing faintly in the darkness, the galaxy began to take notice. The first reaction was confusion. A single human vessel with no fleet behind it was traveling through space at a pace that seemed almost too slow for the vastness of the universe. There was no warship, no heavy armor, no massive guns like those seen on the ships of the galaxy's more advanced species. It was just a single ship, moving through space as if it had no care in the world. The major factions of the galaxy were puzzled. Why had humanity sent just one ship? They knew it couldn't be a diplomatic mission. Humans were too young to have such deep alliances, and it certainly wasn't a military mission. A single ship couldn't stand up to the fleets of warships that were spread across the galaxy. Some of the galaxy's more powerful leaders even laughed at the thought of a human ship coming to challenge them. They scoffed, thinking that it was just a small, insignificant attempt by the humans to prove they were worthy of attention. But as the ship drew closer to the heart of the galaxy, where the most powerful of the galaxy's empires resided, things started to change. Leaders from the various factions began to question each other. Why was this ship coming here? What was its purpose? A few sent scouts to follow it, but the human vessel moved with an unusual grace, almost as if it knew it was being watched. The scouts returned with no answers, only more questions. It was as if the ship itself was a mystery wrapped in an enigma. Despite the confusion, the leaders of the galaxy's major factions decided to gather their forces. If this human ship had any ill intentions, they would be ready. The galaxy wasn't going to let one ship, no matter how small, threaten the peace that had existed for centuries. The great empires of the galaxy prepared their fleets, sending a message to all who would listen. Humanity was not to be trusted. As the human ship passed through the outer systems of the galaxy, the tension grew. It was as if the entire galaxy had come to a halt, waiting for something to happen. The ship continued its journey, gliding through the stars as if it were on a peaceful cruise. Its engines burned a faint blue, casting an eerie glow across the darkness of space. There were no signs of weapons, no shields protecting it from attack, and no signs of military technology of any kind. But that didn't make the galaxy's leaders feel safer. It made them even more suspicious. Was it a trap? Or was this ship really so naive that it had no idea what it was heading toward? As it drew closer to the central systems, the galaxy's most advanced civilizations began to make their move. Scouts and intelligence teams were sent to intercept the ship. The humans, they reasoned, must have some secret technology, something that had allowed them to build such a craft. No one could understand how they could be so bold, how they could send just one ship into the heart of enemy territory. The mystery deepened, and the whispers began to grow louder. The leaders who had once laughed at humanity's insignificant place in the galaxy now began to grow wary. Could this ship truly pose a threat, or was there something more going on? The tension in the galaxy reached its peak, and all eyes were on the approaching vessel. It was only a matter of time before someone made a move. Someone would try to engage the ship, to force it to show its true intentions. Yet, as the ship approached the heart of the galaxy, there was one thing that no one could predict, one thing that no one could see coming: the calm that surrounded the vessel. The ship seemed to be moving with purpose, but it wasn't rushing. It wasn't trying to outrun its pursuers or fight back against the suspicions of the galaxy. It simply continued its journey, one step at a time. And so, as the galaxy wondered and speculated, the ship continued on, drawing ever closer to the moment when everything would change. For now, all anyone could do was wait. wait for the unknown, wait for the inevitable. And as they waited, the question that lingered in everyone's mind remained the same. Why had humanity sent just one ship? The answer to that question would come soon, and when it did, the galaxy would never be the same again. The silence of space was broken only by the faint hum of the lone ship as it drifted deeper into enemy territory. Its course was unhurried, almost as if it were strolling through the vast emptiness, unaware of the growing tension that surrounded it. No one could quite understand why humanity had chosen to send just this single vessel, and as it drew closer to the heart of the galaxy, the uncertainty only grew. This was no ordinary ship, but there were no signs of its true power. Nothing suggested that it carried anything of great significance. Yet, the leaders of the galaxy, who had long ruled with absolute authority, began to feel uneasy. The galaxy had always been a place of competition, of domination and survival. The great empires had built their wealth and power through fleets of massive ships, each capable of obliterating entire worlds. They were not accustomed to seeing something so small. To them, this human ship seemed like a fool's errand. It was out of place, traveling in an unassuming manner, and for a moment, they laughed at the thought of it. Surely, this was nothing more than a small, desperate attempt by humanity to prove it belonged in the stars. But as the ship made its way past the first few systems, the laughter began to fade. It became clear that this wasn't some random human craft. No, there was something different about it. The way it glided through space, the unspoken confidence it exuded, was unsettling. The galaxy's most powerful factions watched the ship closely, sending out their best scouts to follow it. But the human vessel was a ghost. It never made any sudden moves, never gave away any secrets. Its trajectory seemed so calm, so deliberate. Yet, the more they observed it, the more questions arose. What was it carrying? Who was on board? What did humanity intend to do with this ship? The empire closest to the human ship, the one that governed the heart of the galaxy, was the first to take action. Their fleet was legendary, their defenses nearly impenetrable, and they had never feared anything or anyone. They had held dominion over this part of the galaxy for thousands of years, and no one, not even the most ambitious species, had ever come close to challenging their power. Yet, when the human ship entered their systems, they could not ignore it. Something about the ship made them pause. In the war rooms of the Empire's capital, heated debates broke out. Their fleet commanders were used to dealing with threats both real and imagined, but this was different. A single ship, traveling without a fleet, made no sense. They assumed it was a probe, a trick, or perhaps a diplomatic mission, but none of those explanations seemed plausible. Why would humanity send a single, vulnerable ship into the heart of their empire? It made no sense that as the ship continued its journey, the tension began to grow. The Empire's intelligence division worked overtime, sending reconnaissance drones to gather any information they could. Yet, every time they tried to gather details about the ship, it slipped away, always staying one step ahead. The humans seemed to be on top of their game, anticipating every move the Empire made. This wasn't luck, it was deliberate. Soon the Empire could no longer deny it. This was no simple mission. The ship had to be hiding something. It wasn't just a small probe or a diplomatic envoy. It was a statement. But a statement of what? That was the question that gnawed at them. The fleet commanders were growing restless. They demanded answers. And then, one of them suggested something radical. What if the ship was a decoy? A small, seemingly weak target meant to distract them from a much larger force waiting just beyond the stars. It was a clever ruse, they thought. Humanity might have been new to the galaxy, but they weren't stupid. If that were the case, then the Empire was in grave danger. But as they pondered the possibility of an incoming fleet, something unexpected happened. The human ship, so quiet and unassuming, suddenly sent a transmission. The message came through on all channels, clear and concise. The galaxy's leaders, still watching closely, waited for it to be decoded. The moment the transmission was fully translated, it sent a chill through everyone who heard it. We come in peace, but if provoked, we will destroy everything. The message was simple, but its implications were enormous. No one expected such a bold declaration. The Empire's leaders, who had once dismissed humanity as insignificant, now found themselves faced with a challenge unlike any they had ever encountered. The very idea that a single human ship would have the audacity to threaten them was both laughable and terrifying. It was a riddle they couldn't solve, but the leaders of the Empire were not quick to panic. Instead, they laughed. A single ship, with no fleet, was threatening them. They dismissed it as a bluff, an attempt to intimidate. But deep down, there was a seed of doubt that began to take root. Could humanity truly be this bold? Or was there something more to this ship than anyone realized? As the ship continued its journey deeper into the heart of the Empire, the first hints of something dangerous began to emerge. It was subtle at first, an odd energy signature detected just outside the ship's hull. Then, a strange pulse emanated from the vessel, a burst of energy that rippled through space, causing interference with the Empire's sensors. It wasn't an attack, but it was a warning. The Empire's fleet stood ready, prepared to neutralize the human ship if it dared to make a move, but the ship didn't fight. It didn't flee. It simply continued its path, undeterred by the growing tension around it. As the human vessel neared the Empire's capital, the galaxy's leaders held their collective breath. The moment of truth was coming. Everyone had been waiting for this. What would humanity do next? Would they back down, or would they prove that they were a force to be reckoned with? The ship approached the capital, its engines glowing faintly in the distance. It was only a matter of time before they would get their answer, and as the galaxy watched, one thought dominated their minds. Why had humanity sent just one ship? It was a question that would soon have an answer that no one could have possibly predicted. The quiet of space was shattered in an instant. The human ship, which had silently made its way through the galaxy, finally arrived at the most heavily fortified system in the entire Empire. The vast, mighty defenses of the capital planet, once considered impenetrable, were now on high alert. Every sensor, every watchtower, and every military ship was focused on the lone vessel that had been drifting through their space for what seemed like an eternity. Yet, it wasn't until this moment that the true danger of the situation began to unfold. The ship, small and seemingly insignificant, had crossed every boundary the galaxy had set for centuries. There were no fleets to back it up, no warships to guard it, and no signs of any weapons. It seemed like a harmless speck in the universe, one that didn't even register as a threat. But as it approached the heart of the Empire, the galaxy held its breath. It wasn't the ship that people feared, but what it might be hiding. It wasn't the ship that caused the galaxy to tremble, it was the unknown, the mystery that surrounded it. Inside the ship, the crew remained calm. They weren't running from danger, nor were they rushing toward it. They knew exactly where they were going. They had prepared for this moment their entire lives. Their mission was one of simplicity, of duty, but to those watching from the far-off planets and powerful military outposts, it was nothing short of madness. Why would a species that had only recently discovered the stars dare to send one ship into the lion's den of the galaxy? The command room aboard the human ship was quiet, save for the soft hum of the ship's internal systems. The captain, a young but seasoned officer, stood at the helm staring at the massive screen that showed their path ahead. Behind him, the crew worked efficiently, their fingers flying over consoles and readouts. They were prepared for this moment, prepared for the most challenging confrontation of their lives. But in their hearts, they all knew one thing: the galaxy had underestimated them. The communication officer was the first to speak. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission. It's coming from the Empire's Central Command." He paused, his fingers hovering over the console as he processed the message. "It's a challenge. They're demanding we halt our approach and identify ourselves." The captain's voice remained steady as he replied, "Proceed with the standard response. We're not here for war. Tell them that we come in peace." But there was an unspoken weight to his words, a weight that even he couldn't entirely ignore. The truth was, they weren't there just for peace. They weren't there to beg for mercy or plead for a seat at the table. They were there to prove something. The transmission was sent, a simple message that crackled across the distance, barely cutting through the cold silence of space. "We come in peace, but if provoked, we will destroy everything." It was a message that had been prepared long ago, a warning that would either be dismissed as an empty threat or met with full-on aggression. But the captain knew one thing for certain: the Empire wasn't going to simply ignore it. The silence that followed, the transmission, was unbearable. The entire crew sat still, watching the large screens that displayed the growing fleets around them. They could see the enemy ships mobilizing, ready to strike. They could feel the tension building in the air, a storm that threatened to explode at any moment. It wasn't just the crew that felt it. Even the Empire's fleet, powerful as it was beginning to sense it. A single ship, one unarmed vessel, had managed to rattle them to their core. And then, the first sign of trouble appeared. A fleet of enemy ships, massive in size and armed to the teeth, moved into position, forming a blockade around the human ship. The captain's eyes narrowed. The moment they had feared had arrived. The Empire wasn't going to wait any longer. They had made their move, preparing to destroy the human ship before it could do any harm. But the human vessel didn't react as expected. It didn't flinch. It didn't attempt to outrun them or dodge their attack. Instead, it stood still, as if waiting for something. The Empire's ships circled closer, their weapons charged and ready to fire. The tension in the air thickened. Everyone was waiting for the first shot to be fired, but the captain had a plan, one that no one would see coming. Without warning, a sharp, blinding pulse of energy shot out from the ship. It was as if the ship had been holding back its power all along, waiting for this exact moment. The pulse was directed not at the enemy ships themselves, but at their systems. The blast slammed into the nearest enemy vessel, knocking out its communication systems and scrambling its weapons. The ship was disabled instantly, and the rest of the fleet could do nothing but watch as their own technologies failed them. The Empire's fleets hesitated for just a moment, but it was enough. In that instant, the human ship launched its true offensive. A second wave of pulses sent shockwaves through the Empire's entire fleet, turning the tide of the battle in a way no one had ever imagined. The once mighty ships of the Empire, each one thought to be nearly indestructible, were falling like paper. Their weapons fizzled out, their shields flickered and died, and their crews were left in a state of confusion and panic. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and unwavering. "This is not a war. This is a message. We are here to show you that humanity is no longer a species to be overlooked. We are here to claim our place in the galaxy." In that moment, the entire galaxy was forced to rethink everything it had believed about humanity. The ship, once dismissed as a joke, was now proving to be something far more dangerous. With its unrelenting firepower and an unstoppable will, humanity was making its mark on the galaxy, one shot at a time. But what really sent shockwaves across the Empire's systems wasn't just the power of the ship, it was the realization that this ship, with its small crew and limited resources, had outsmarted the most powerful empires in the galaxy. No one had seen it coming. No one had expected the humans to be so bold, so prepared, so capable of turning the tables on their enemies. The battle had only just begun, but the first wave of shock had already hit. And as the Empire's fleets struggled to regain control, one thought rang clear in every commander's mind. The galaxy was about. The stillness of space had always been deceptive. Outwardly calm, it hid the fury of the cosmos beneath its serene exterior. And for all the grand empires of the galaxy, the vastness of space had always been their allier buffer that kept them safe from any real threat. But now, as the human ship pushed deeper into the heart of the Empire, that deceptive calm was about to be shattered. The first attack had been a warning, but no one realized the true gravity of what they were dealing with until it was too late. The enemy's fleets had been scrambling, trying to reorganize after the unexpected assault. Their ships were in disarray, their systems crippled by the human ship's pulse weaponry. But the Empire's military was not weak. It was vast, well-organized, and driven by a centuries-old tradition of dominance. They wouldn't be undone by a single unarmed human vessel. They were proud, their confidence unshaken by the initial strike, and now, they were preparing their counterattack. From the depths of the capital's command center, a plan was that sought to end this mystery once and for all. Fleet commanders, once dismissive of the human ship, were now desperate to regain control of the situation. There was no turning back. They couldn't afford to allow a single human vessel to disrupt their carefully laid plans, to tarnish their reputation as the unchallenged rulers of the galaxy. "Activate the full fleet," came the command from the Supreme Admiral of the Empire. "We will eliminate this pest once and for all." It was an order that echoed through the corridors of the capital's war rooms, reverberating through the Empire's communication networks. The fleet, once scattered and in disarray, began to reform. Massive dreadnoughts, their weapons primed and ready, moved into formation, while smaller ships darted across space, preparing to intercept the human ship. The full might of the Empire would be brought to bear against this one, seemingly insignificant, ship. Meanwhile, aboard the human vessel, the crew had sensed the shift. The calm exterior of the ship's approach had been replaced by an air of quiet tension. The captain stood at the helm, watching the data scroll across the console. The Empire was mobilizing its fleets. It was coming. They were about to face the full force of the galaxy's most powerful empire. But the captain didn't flinch. There was no hesitation in their eyes, no fear. They had prepared for this moment. They had trained for the chaos that was about to unfold. And while they may have been small, their resolve was unyielding. Humanity wasn't there to simply survive. They were there to prove their place, to show that they would no longer be silenced, no longer be underestimated. "Deploy countermeasures," the captain ordered. "Prepare to engage the fleet." The crew responded immediately, their movements swift and precise. Everyone knew their role. Everyone knew the stakes. The ship's engines hummed as a deep, resonating vibration filled the air. It was time. The Empire's fleets were closing in, their ships blocking every possible escape route. Yet, the human vessel showed no signs of slowing, no signs of surrender. It continued its forward march into the heart of the Empire, cutting through space. With unrelenting purpose, the Empire's first salvo came quickly. A barrage of energy weapons lit up the darkness of space, streaking toward the human ship with blistering speed. The ships, powerful and massive, released wave after wave of fire, their cannons thundering with the sound of destruction. It was a display of power meant to intimidate, meant to break the spirit of any who dared challenge the might of the Empire. But the human ship did something no one expected. Instead of trying to evade, it met the attack head-on. A shimmering barrier enveloped the ship in an instant. It wasn't a traditional shield, not like the ones seen on other ships. No. This was something different, something alien, something that had been adapted by humanity from forgotten technology. The energy blasts crashed into the barrier, but instead of tearing the ship apart, they simply refracted and dissipated into space. The ship barely even shook from the impact. That the Empire's commanders stared in disbelief. How could this be? They had prepared for everything, every possible countermeasure, every possible tactic. But this was beyond their understanding. It wasn't just the power of the human ship that struck them. It was the ingenuity, the intelligence behind it. Humanity had figured out how to turn the tide, how to use their limited resources, to craft something that was more than the sum of its parts. The human ship retaliated. With precise movements, it fired its own weapons, launching small but devastating energy pulses at the enemy fleets. The pulses were unlike anything the Empire had seen before. They were unpredictable, bouncing off multiple ships, disabling their weapons, disabling their shields. The Empire's fleet commanders scrambled to respond, but it was too late. They had underestimated humanity. They had underestimated the sheer willpower behind this ship. The battle raged on, but with each passing minute, the balance shifted. The Empire's fleets, once the mightiest in the galaxy, were faltering. Ships that had once been thought indestructible were now falling one by one. Their advanced weapons, once thought invincible, were now rendered useless by the human ships. Superior tactics and technology. Inside the human ship, the crew remained focused. They knew they couldn't win by sheer firepower alone. They had to outsmart the Empire, to use their cunning and adaptability to exploit weaknesses in the Empire's otherwise flawless military machine. Every move was calculated, every decision deliberate. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. The fate of humanity in the galaxy hung in the balance. Another wave incoming, the sensor officer called out, his voice tight with urgency. "Hold steady," the captain replied, a calmness in their voice that betrayed no fear. "We've been preparing for this moment our entire lives. Let's show them what humanity is capable of." The Empire's second wave hit with even more ferocity than the first. Dozens of ships, all armed to the teeth, surrounded the human vessel. It was an attempt to overwhelm them, to break their defenses with sheer numbers. But the human ship was ready. One by one, the Empire's ships began to fall. The energy pulses struck again, this time with even more precision. Massive enemy ships turned into floating debris, their hulls torn apart by the powerful blasts. The capital ship of the Empire, a towering, majestic vessel that had been the pride of the Empire, was now a smoldering ruin. The human ship, smaller but more agile, danced through the chaos. It was as if it were a blade, cutting through the heart of the Empire with surgical precision. The Empire's pride was crumbling, and in its place, humanity was emerging as a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy would never see it the same way again. And in that moment, as the Empire's once unbeaten fleet began to falter, the captain spoke a single word, one that summed up everything that had led to this moment: victory. The battle had shifted dramatically. What had once seemed like an impossible mission, one that would end in utter failure for humanity, was now turning into something that no one in the galaxy could have anticipated. The human ship, against all odds, was surviving. In fact, it was thriving, tearing through the Empire's formidable fleet like a predator stalking its prey. The enemy's massive warships, which had once seemed invincible, were now being brought to their knees, and the Empire, with all its pride, was beginning to unravel before its very eyes. The human crew had held their ground, not by sheer force, but by intelligence, cunning, and an unshakable resolve. They had known from the start that they wouldn't be able to overpower the enemy's fleets with brute strength alone. Instead, they had relied on something more profound, an understanding of the Empire's weaknesses. a keen awareness of how to use their limited resources to cause maximum damage. Aboard the ship, the crew worked in perfect harmony, their focus unwavering as they carried out their captain's orders with precision. Each crew member knew their role. Each move was calculated. Every pulse of energy, every shift in strategy, was meticulously planned. What had started as an underdog mission was now shaping up to be the most remarkable battle the galaxy had ever seen. The captain's eyes never left the screen in front of them, watching as the Empire's ships continued to falter. Their once mighty dreadnoughts, which had been towering symbols of power and domination, now appeared like oversized targets, easily incapacitated by the human ships' seemingly unpredictable pulses. The Empire's sophisticated weapons, designed to tear through entire fleets, fizzled out under the human ships' unique defenses. The galaxy's greatest military might, accustomed to being the rulers of all they surveyed, were now scrambling for answers. Their once formidable advantage had crumbled, leaving them in a state of confusion and desperation. The Empire's fleet commanders who had thought this battle would be over in moments were now helpless. They had miscalculated. They had underestimated humanity's ingenuity and its ability to adapt. And with each passing second, their grip on power slipped further. The enemy's counterattack came fast, but it wasn't enough. The second wave, which was meant to overwhelm the human ship with sheer firepower, had the opposite effect. The human vessel danced through space, its defenses as sharp and precise as ever. Energy blasts that would have torn apart any other ship in the galaxy were absorbed or redirected by the ship's unique technology. Then came the surprise that no one had expected. The human ship unleashed its trump card. It was not just another pulse of energy, nor was it the defensive barrier that had saved them so many times before. No, this was something entirely different. As the Empire's fleet bore down on them, a massive energy surge erupted from the human ship, more powerful than anything seen before. The energy washed over the nearest enemy ship like a tidal wave, disintegrating its shields and vaporizing the hull in a flash. The shockwave from the explosion rippled through space, sending smaller enemy ships careening out of control. For a moment, it seemed as though time itself had paused. The fleet commanders could hardly comprehend what had just happened. The blast was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a statement, a clear message that humanity, though small and young, was capable of extraordinary things. The Empire's once imposing fleet, now struggling to regain its footing, had no choice but to retreat. The human ship, its mission still not complete, was proving to be more than just a lone vessel. It was a symbol of humanity's potential, a signal that the galaxy would never be the same again. On board, the crew was filled with a quiet determination. They knew that this wasn't just about winning this battle. It was about sending a message to the galaxy, a message that humanity was not a species to be overlooked. They weren't here to ask for permission. They were here to claim their place. They had learned the harsh truths of the galaxy, the coldness, the indifference, the dominance of the older empires, but they had also learned how to survive within it, how to use their resourcefulness to turn the tables. The captain remained calm as the enemy fleet retreated, knowing that their victory was not yet secured. There was still more to do. The battle was far from over, but now, for the first time since this mission began, there was a sense of hope aboard the ship. Humanity had shown what it was capable of. It had broken through the walls of uncertainty and doubt that had once surrounded them. Prepare for the next phase, the captain ordered, their voice steady. We've only just begun, and they were right. The human ship, despite its success so far, still had much to do. There were more fleets to face, more systems to liberate, more battles to fight. But with each passing minute, the captain knew that the Empire's resolve was cracking. This single human ship had done what no one had thought possible. It had stood toe-to-toe with the galaxy's greatest military force and had come out victorious, even if just for now. But what really mattered was the message they had sent to the galaxy. This was a moment when humanity's future and the stars began to take shape. No longer would they be ignored or belittled. No longer would they be treated like a fleeting species without the strength to survive. Humanity had proven that it could stand alongside the ancient empires. It could fight. It could conquer. It could dominate. The Empire had underestimated them, and now, it was too late. They had made a grave mistake. With the Empire in disarray, the human ship continued its journey, cutting through space with newfound purpose. The battle had become more than just a fight for survival. It had become a symbol of humanity's resilience, their drive to not only survive but to thrive. The galaxy would never see them the same way again. They had come to the stars not to ask for a place. but to take one. And with every victory, every strike, they were proving that humanity was not a force to be dismissed. As the human ship moved forward, the Empire was left to lick its wounds. The message had been sent, and the galaxy would never forget the day when humanity's cannons roared and the stars themselves trembled. The hum of the ship's engines echoed softly in the silence of space, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded only hours before. The human ship had struck the Empire with a force no one had anticipated. And now, as the aftermath settled in, the galaxy found itself at a crossroads. The mighty Empire, so confident in its invincibility, had been humbled by a single vessel from a species many believed was not yet ready to take its place among the stars. But the galaxy's rulers couldn't ignore the new reality that was unfolding. Before them they had miscalculated, and now they would have to face the consequences of underestimating humanity. On board the human vessel, the crew remained focused. They had proven their strengths, their resilience, but there was more to do. The captain knew that the battle wasn't over yet. It was only the beginning. The victory so far had been hard-earned, but it was just the opening act in a much larger struggle. The Empire's forces might have retreated for now, but the threat was far from gone. The galaxy was watching, waiting for the next move. But as the crew went about their duties, something unexpected happened, something that no one aboard the ship had anticipated. As the captain stood at the command console reviewing the damage done to the Empire's fleets, a faint signal appeared on the radar. It was weak, almost imperceptible, but there was no mistaking it. It was a message, a transmission, coming from deep within the heart of the Empire's capital. The captain leaned forward, eyes narrowing. It was the kind of message they had prepared for, but never expected to receive. It was a plea for help, a call from the Empire's most powerful leaders, asking for a ceasefire. The words were careful, measured, but the message was clear. The Empire was offering terms of negotiation. The galaxy had been watching the conflict unfold, but this new development sent ripples through every faction, every government. The Empire, one that had ruled with such absolute power, that had never once considered negotiating with any species, was now extending an olive branch to humanity. But why? What had changed? The captain's fingers hovered over the console. The message was filled with threats, masked as offers. It was a well-calculated move, one that seemed to say, "We've suffered, but we are still powerful. We're willing to talk, but understand that we control the terms." Yet, despite the calm tone, the undertone was unmistakable. Desperation. The Empire was on its knees. It was reeling, unsure of how to deal with the human ship that had so unexpectedly disrupted its dominance. After a long pause, the captain exhaled, glancing at the officers stationed around the room. They all knew what had to come next. They couldn't allow the Empire to regain its composure, to regroup and reclaim its strength. The Empire might be asking for peace, but peace on their terms would mean nothing. Humanity wasn't here to beg. They weren't here to accept anything less than equality. The captain was clear on this. No response. The captain said, "We keep moving forward. The galaxy needs to see that we won't back down. We aren't just one ship. We are a species with a future, and that future begins now." But the captain wasn't alone in their decision. The entire crew felt it. This was more than just a battle for territory. This was a war for recognition. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for respect. And as the ship glided through space, its destination unknown, the tension aboard was palpable. The next move had to be strategic. Meanwhile, the Empire's leaders, who had once been so sure of their position in the galaxy, were now scrambling. Their fleets had been decimated, their defenses shattered by a single, unrelenting force. They had assumed that the threat from humanity would be easily contained, that their power would be enough to crush such a small, young species. But now, with their fleets in disarray and their leaders on the defensive, they realized just how wrong they had been. And so, the leaders of the Empire gathered in a secret war room, a place far from the eyes of the galaxy. There, in the shadows of their most secure command center, they began to discuss their next move. They knew they couldn't afford to let humanity continue its rampage. If humanity was allowed to persist unchecked, there would be no stopping them. The Empire, once the pinnacle of power, would be overthrown by this new, unexpected challenger. But the Empire's response was not one of strength. No, it was a plea for survival. The leaders knew that the tide had turned, and it was no longer a matter of how they could defeat humanity, but rather how they could preserve their own existence. The galaxy had witnessed the fall of their fleets, the collapse of their military might, and they knew that they could no longer afford to be the hunters. They had become the hunted. The plea for peace was not just a tactic. It was a last-ditch effort to save what was left of the Empire. But the Empire's leaders had failed to see one crucial thing. The power they had once wielded so effortlessly had now been rendered useless. It wasn't just about military might anymore. It was about something deeper, something that no amount of firepower could match. Humanity had shown that it could think differently, act differently. They had outsmarted the Empire, and now they were ready to shape the future on their own terms. But as the captain reviewed the incoming transmission once more, they realized that the offer from the Empire was not one of strength, but one of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of a species that had only just begun to reveal its potential. Humanity was not the same as before. They were no longer the quiet, insignificant species that had been dismissed by the galaxy's rulers. They had grown, adapted, and now they were ready to take their place among the stars. The captain turned to the crew, their voice firm. The galaxy has just learned the truth. Humanity is here to stay, and no one, not the Empire, not any of the galaxies, mighty powers will ever make us beg for our place again. We're done hiding, we're done being underestimated. The ship continued its journey, cutting through space like a blade. The Empire, once the unquestioned ruler of the stars, had just learned the cost of arrogance. Humanity had made its mark, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Empire's plea for peace had been heard, but it was too late. The future had already been written, and humanity had just begun to turn the page. As the human ship sailed through the stars, its engines humming with quiet determination, the silence of space felt almost unnatural. The galaxy had witnessed something unprecedented, something that would echo through the corridors of power for millennia to come. The once mighty Empire, with all its fleets and all its pride, had been brought to its knees by a single ship. But that wasn't the most shocking part. What truly left the galaxy breathless was the simple fact that humanity had not only survived this battle, they had made it clear that they were not merely guests in the stars, but players with a voice that could no longer be ignored. The ship continued its journey toward the heart of the Empire, its mission not yet completed. The retreat of the Empire's fleet had been a victory, but it was only the beginning. The captain, standing before the massive viewscreen, stared into the expanse of space, eyes focused, the weight of the galaxy's future hanging heavy on their shoulders. It wasn't just about the battle they had won, it was about what came next. What would the galaxy do now that humanity had shown its hand? Would they embrace the inevitable change, or would they attempt to suppress it, to crush this newfound power before it could rise any further? Behind the captain, the crew was still buzzing with adrenaline. They had done something no one thought possible. They had taken on the greatest empire in the galaxy and survived, even triumphed. But there was still no time to celebrate, no moment to bask in their glory. There was work to be done. The ship's course was still set, still aimed directly at the heart of the Empire's capital. The final chapter of this story had yet to unfold. We've sent them a message, the captain said quietly, almost to themselves. Now, we need to see if they understand it. As if on cue, the communications officer turned, their eyes wide with astonishment. Captain, we're receiving another transmission. It's from the Emperor's inner circle. The words hung in the air, heavy with significance. The Emperor, the one who had been so confident in the Empire's unshakable rule, now reduced to communicating with a species they had once dismissed as insignificant. The entire crew stood in rapt attention, knowing that this was the moment that would define everything. Would the Empire's leaders offer a token of surrender, or would they lash out, too proud to admit defeat? Whatever happened, one thing was clear: the galaxy would never be the same again. The captain took a deep breath, put it through. The transmission crackled before a cold, measured voice filled the command room. Humanity, the voice began. You have made your point. Your tactics have shattered our fleets, humiliated our empire. You have proven yourselves capable of things we thought impossible. But understand this, the empire is not so easily broken. You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over. Our power is vast. Our reach, limitless. There was a long pause. The captain could almost hear the smugness in the Emperor's voice. The arrogance that had once been the hallmark of the Empire, but beneath it, there was something else, something that the captain didn't miss. It was fear. The Empire was afraid, not just of losing a battle, but of losing everything. Do not mistake this victory for the end of the struggle, the Emperor continued, their voice cold and calculating. We will rebuild, and when we do, you will regret ever crossing us. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. The crew exchanged glances, each of them processing the words in their own way. The Empire had spoken, But it had only confirmed what the captain had already suspected. They hadn't learned. They still didn't understand what humanity had become. This wasn't just about power. This wasn't just about weapons. This was about a shift, a transformation in the balance of the galaxy. The Empire had failed to realize that it wasn't merely a battle that had been won. It was a statement that could not be undone. The captain turned slowly, eyes filled with determination. "They don't understand yet," they said softly, "but they will." In that moment, something shifted. Aboard the ship, the crew who had fought so hard to get here realized that their fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for something much bigger. This was the moment humanity could step into its rightful place in the galaxy. Not as a forgotten species, but as a force to be reckoned with. The next steps wouldn't just define their future, they would define the future of everyone. Without another word, the captain turned back to the console. The ship was already moving forward, cutting through the stars with purpose. The Empire might think it could rebuild, that it could wipe away the humiliation, but humanity's victory was more than just a battle, it was a turning point. The Emperor's threats didn't scare them. They didn't even worry about the rebuilding. Humanity wasn't backing down. Humanity had already shown the galaxy that they could not be ignored, that their resolve was unbreakable. The captain knew what had to come next. The Emperor's forces had been defeated, but the Empire was still out there. The galaxy had watched, and they were waiting to see how humanity would respond. It was time to send one final message, a message that would be heard across every star system, every corner of the galaxy. "We're not going anywhere," the captain declared. "Humanity has taken its place, and no one, not even the Empire, can change that. We will rise, we will stand, and we will show the galaxy that the future belongs to us." As the human ship continued its path toward the heart of the Empire, a new resolve settled over the crew. They had done the impossible, and now the galaxy would witness the dawn of a new era. An era where humanity would no longer cower in the shadows, but would take its place among the stars as an equal, as a force to be respected, feared, and admired. The final blow had yet to come, but the Empire had already lost. It wasn't just the fleets or the battles, it was the mindset. The Empire had failed to realize that the true power of humanity wasn't in its technology or weapons, but in its spirit, and that spirit had already begun to change the galaxy. The cannons had roared now. The universe would know. Humanity was here to stay.